1923. Eamon de Valera, political leader of the Republicans beaten in the Irish Civil War, emerges from hiding to speak at Ennis, County Clare. Irish Free State troops fire over the heads of the crowd and break up the meeting. They arrest de Valera, who spends the next year in jail. The Free State had totally defeated the Republicans in the Civil War, but it still held thousands in jail, many of them now on hunger strike for their release. And fellow Republicans gathered outside Mountjoy Jail in Dublin, some going on hunger strike themselves in sympathy with the prisoners in their cells.
You lie in bed and you keep your eyes straight in front when there's anyone round. And if they come into the cell, you roll your eyes. You roll your eyes. You don't move your head. That's a sign of extreme weakness. And I might have frightened them that way.
There was about 1,500 or 1,600 men prisoners there. And some of them gave in after the first 2 or 3 days, some of them after 5 days, and some of them, and the majority of them gave in after 14 days. But they weren't released.
The hunger strike failed, but the prisoners were eventually released, and the new Irish Free State set about trying to construct a peaceful, democratic society where the gun would no longer rule. The rebuilding of the shattered Dublin forecourts, from which the Republican IRA had defied the Free State, was a symbol of this new resolve. De Valera remained in a Free State prison until September 1924, when he was suddenly released. He again addressed the people at Ennis, attacking the Free State established by the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921. None of de Valera's attacks against the Free State had anything very constructive to offer on the question of the border. 6 counties of Ireland were partitioned from the rest of Ireland by the Anglo-Irish Treaty, and under a separate Ulster Parliament and government of their own, they remained inside the United Kingdom.
And the border still runs today along the same line, here along the line of a stream, as it did in 1924, or indeed at the time the treaty was signed in 1921. In that treaty, there was a provision for a boundary commission, which was to determine the border in accordance with the wishes of the inhabitants, as the phrase went. But from the start, there was a dispute about what this phrase really meant. Did it mean mere local adjustments of the border, a few Protestants from here, a few Catholics from there, or did it mean significant reductions of the territory of Northern Ireland in areas where the Catholics and nationalists were in a majority, as in South Armagh, or in the counties of Tyrone and Fermanagh? The Irish delegates who'd signed the treaty assumed that the Boundary Commission clause did mean such significant reductions of the territory of Northern Ireland as would make it impossible in the end for Northern Ireland to survive and would lead to the eventual unification of Ireland. But the not an inch attitude of Northern Irish Protestants, plus this dispute as to what the Boundary Commission actually was to do, meant that in the end it did nothing.
The boundaries stood, an affront to nationalist Irishmen who've assaulted it with rhetoric ever since, though a small group has always preached the use of violence against it.
So there was a meeting held of the executive that had been in existence when the Civil War began, and we decided to reform the IRA. The old executive, which had been elected in 1922, became the executive of the new organization of the IRA.
But the IRA was at first insignificant in a free state, not ashamed to pay tribute to those many tens of thousands of Southern Irishmen who'd fought in the British Army for the rights of small nations, including Ireland, in the First World War. Armistice Day in Dublin, 1924. Armistice Day, Dublin, 1925. And this time, the IRA decides to try and make its presence felt. A smoke bomb goes off in the crowd.
Our aim and object was to demolish all British imperialistic symbols. And all around Dublin there was king's crowns and unicorns and lions stuck everywhere. So a good deal of them was taken down. But King Billy was an eyesore, and it was decided that he'd have to be removed.
The statue of William III then stood in Dublin's College Green.
And Jack was an expert, climbed on my knee and on my shoulder onto the plinth where the statue was. And the horse had a leg sticking out like that. And all he could do was tie it around this horse's leg, this one, and let the fuse drop down. And it was a delayed action, 30 seconds at the foot. We had 3 minutes to get away. So we lit the fuse and we walked across over where Jury's Hotel is and down. And as we got the Fleet Street, we heard bang. Now, it didn't blow the statue down, but it did shake it.
A more serious Republican initiative came from De Valera, who'd formed a political party, Fianna Fáil, which in 1927 went to take those many seats in the Dáil to which they'd been elected. Reporters watched because Fianna Fáil would not take that oath to the king demanded by the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Fianna Fáil, which means soldiers of destiny, were refused admittance and turned away. De Valera's supporters in the street then rallied to his headquarters. Here they heard De Valera speak about refusing to take a false oath recreant to the aspirations of the Irish people. The time-honoured aspirations of the Irish people were something the new Free State government were equally anxious to respect, and they turned out regularly every year for the ceremony in honour of the executed Republicans of 1916. This was to be the last Easter ceremony attended by Kevin O'Higgins, the tall man in the centre here, Minister of Home Affairs. On Sunday, the 10th of July, 1927, O'Higgins was shot down on his way to Mass in the roadway outside his home. His murder was to change the course of the Free State's political existence.
Kevin O'Higgins was killed by a small group of IRA men who thought to make policy, more aggressive policy for the IRA, but it wasn't an official IRA killing, although there's a group of IRA men who did it.
Up to now, De Valera and Fianna Fáil's refusal to take the oath, and thus their seats, had left them outside the Dáil, though in the last election they'd won only 3 seats less than the government party itself. Clearly, it was a highly dangerous situation to have so much Republican support unrepresented in a democratic parliament.
We determined then that Fianna Fáil would not be allowed to remain outside the Dáil, that we'd passed legislation that required every candidate parliamentary candidate to promise to take his seat if elected and to declare him disqualified if he didn't take the seat and let the next man get the seat. So by that process, we drove Fianna Fáil into the Dáil. I suppose they were only looking for a good excuse, you know, but it came. So O'Higgins's death had that effect that it brought about a normalisation of politics here.
Fianna Fáil thereafter signed the oath book, now declaring this an empty formality, and became the official opposition. 5 years later, De Valera won a general election. He did this with considerable help from the IRA.
Well, we've done a lot of double voting. You know, pretending we were other people that was dead, or maybe that wasn't dead but didn't vote.
There was very close liaison during the election campaign between the IRA at local level and also in Dublin.
We went around canvassing for the elections of Fianna Fáil in companies. That was to say, we'd plenty of men. And when we went to the doors of houses and knocked, and the people came out, 2 or 3 men together, and then looked over the far side and seen another 2 or 3 over there, another 2 or 3 over there, and along the street. Well, it gave them an idea that they better say yes, you know, that's although we weren't compelling them.
Oh, the IRA was a very strong influence in the 1932 elections.
Mr. Cosgrave, President of the Irish Free State, is here seen delivering his biggest election address on College Green, Dublin. The leader of the government party is, however, faced with defeat at the polls. This result was not altogether unexpected, as the very firmness of Mr. Cosgrave's administration in dealing with corruption and communist terrorism had made him many enemies. The Republican Party is led by Mr. De Valera, whom you see here. He has established a considerable lead in the returns, and his successes have been secured at the expense of all parties.
De Valera and Fianna Fáil now came to power and were to stay in power for the next 16 years. They would soon abolish the oath to the Crown altogether. But the animosities of the Civil War were still strong, and some in Fianna Fáil doubted whether their opponents would peacefully accept the result of the election.
When we went in, when we were going into the chamber and from that way, and a zealous colleague produced a few revolvers and handed them out to us. I got one of them, I have it still, but it didn't serve us with any ammunition.
And it was a very stormy and tempestuous atmosphere. They were in a very strange state of mind, the Valera supporters. They had a queer kind of idea that if they got a majority, Mr. Cosgrave, who had substantially established the state and set up all our institutions, would stage some kind of putsch. And the result of it was that the Fianna Fáil TDs arrived in the House on the day for the election of the Taoiseach with their pockets bulging with revolvers. One old gentleman was found in a telephone box assembling a machine gun. But in fact what happened was the motion was put, De Valera was elected, and we all went home to tea.
The Free State Army, which had fought against De Valera's side in the Civil War, was now there to defend his government.
We were well conditioned mentally over a long period, years, over 12 years anyway, to the proposition that the will of the people must prevail, that the ballot box must prevail. I think on the contrary, that on the other side, there was an uneasiness or a lack of confidence or a disbelief in the readiness of the army to uphold the institutions of state, regardless of who manned them or ordered them.
I was approached to know what I was going to do. And I could see that there was a certain amount of kite flying about the question. And I said, as far as I'm concerned, I said, we accepted the treaty by a democratic vote of 7. If Dev gets in, I said, good luck to him. We'll accept him and let him see what he can do with the country.
it will be the dawn of a new day for Ireland. Our people in the United States, in Britain, in Australia, will know a gladness they have not experienced since 1921. The joy born of the coming together of old friends long divided has set the youth of the country on fire.
One of the very first actions of De Valera's new government was to release all IRA prisoners from jail. Republicans celebrated in Dublin. And triumphant Republicans were addressed by Sean McGuinness of the IRA.
Today, Republican Dublin assembles in monster demonstration to welcome in liberty the Republican prisoners. I and my comrade prisoners today celebrate the victory of the recent elections, and in doing so, we celebrate the downfall of the Cosgrave murder gang.
Maud Gonne, mother of Sean MacBride.
But Ireland has stood together in this. The Irish, the IRA stood firm, and they have defeated Cosgrave and the coercionists.
But whose victory was it, the IRA's or De Valera's? Or were they no longer to be distinguished? For a time, there was to be a period of tranquility in which the Republican defeat in the Civil War seemed turned by De Valera to political victory for all Republicans.
The program of Fianna Fáil has now been definitely adopted as the national policy of the Irish people. That program aims at restoring the unity of Ireland and securing its independence, at placing as many families as possible upon the land, at building up our industries, so that the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses we live in, the articles in common daily use in the lives of our people may all, as far as is reasonably possible, be produced by Irish labour from Irish materials. Ireland united, Ireland free, Ireland self-supporting and self-reliant, Ireland speaking her own tongue, and through it giving to the world our ancient treasures of Christian Gaelic culture. These are the ideals to which enthusiastic young Ireland is now devoting its energies.
But in concentrating on this almost mystical introvert vision, the traditional dogma of most Irish nationalist social thinking for decades, De Valera's government neglected that social reform which had been the hope of some idealists.
He established this, all the social thinking then, extremely conservative, extremely selfish, extremely insensitive social thinking, which informed all the subsequent, virtually all the subsequent legislation. I think all of the attitude to housing and slum clearance and all that gradually slowed down until we complete indifference to the fact that all these young people are emigrating, most of them completely unskilled with their bare hands, their only qualifications, and relative indifference to this.
Emigration was averaging 16,000 a year and was to continue to do so for many years to come.
1 million of our people, a third of our people, have gone to England to be clothed, fed, housed cared for in sickness and old age. And meanwhile, we continue to abuse Great Britain while we use her at the same time to take our surplus population.
A papal legate arrives in Dublin from Rome. The Roman Catholic Church was the most obviously conservative force in the state, a feature of the state that was neither surprising nor unnatural. The Church had once been the only representative organization the majority of the Irish people had, and that people's political awareness had progressed in step with it.
Councillor Costello, Councillor Mrs. Kettle, Councillor Fitzpatrick, Councillor Patrick Duncan, Councillor Owen Hine, Councillor Martin O'Sullivan.
But the position the Church enjoyed in the state meant that the state now shared the Church's innate conservatism and its traditional resistance to change.
Became more obsessed with religion, the most intense censorship of publications, all the worthwhile Irish authors have been banned, and all the great classical authors have been banned in this country. It became a very tight, tiny, incestuous, intellectually and culturally incestuous society.
Even the IRA, here commemorating the Easter Rising of 1916, had little time for those among them who wished to develop social ideas. They expressed a fundamentally conservative nationalism, looking to past violence as the only inspiration for the future.
The proclamation of the Republic of 1916 will remain for us the fundamental declaration of the right and authority of our nation to fight for its inalienable right to sovereign independence.
The only new force in the state, but equally conservative, were the Blue Shirts, or National Guard, who set themselves up against continuing independent IRA action within the state. The Blue Shirts' leader was a former pro-treaty police commissioner De Valera had dismissed, Owen O'Duffy.
The National Guard is strongly opposed to anything flavouring of a dictatorship or a coup d'etat, and was brought into being to assist the people in their efforts to oppose any departure from democratic and representative government.
De Valera now had two paramilitary forces potentially challenging the authority of his state. One, the Blue Shirts. The other, his one-time comrades, now in the rump of the Republican movement, which had not joined his party, Fianna Fáil, the IRA.
The Irish people fought for centuries to regain control of their own affairs. They have not the least intention of surrendering that control now to any dictator or to any militarist group whatever.
In 1934, he cracked down on the Blue Shirts. In 1936, he proscribed the IRA as an illegal organization.
It was in order to outmaneuver the violent men among his old comrades in arms, and at the same time to work out his own peaceful formula for sovereign independence, that De Valera in 1937 introduced a new constitution. This effectively did away with the treaty. It changed the name of the state from the Irish Free State to Éire, or Ireland, and of course there was no oath to any British monarch in it because that had already been done away with. The Commonwealth was only anonymously acknowledged as something which Éire could make use of if it wanted to, and Éire was proclaimed a sovereign independent state. Indeed, its sovereignty was proclaimed over all 32 counties of Ireland, including Northern Ireland.
It merely recognized that in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, this sovereignty could not be made effective for the time being. The main reason why De Valera didn't call Éire a republic, which is what it now virtually was, as he imagined, to keep the door open for the Northern Protestant and an eventual united Ireland. However, the Northern Protestant, who was instinctively opposed anyway to any idea of a united Ireland, was unlikely to be attracted by the article of the Constitution which declared that Irish was to be the first language of the state and English was to be recognized as a second language. Nor was the Northern Protestant likely to be attracted by the article which gave a special position in the state to the Holy Catholic, Apostolic and Roman Church as guardian of the faith professed by the great majority of the citizens.
There was intense pressure from certain groups, Christus Rex and other groups like that, to have the church, instead the Roman Catholic Church, declared to be the established church of the state.
Did De Valera want it that way?
No, no. He was strongly obdurate about it. And the article which appeared, which has now been deleted, was his way out of saying, if you remember what was the Catholic Church, as the church of the majority of the people, is entitled to special honour.
So what sort of state had this scrupulously pedantic Republican now achieved?
De Valera was quite determined to vindicate his own past and to establish a republic without establishing a republic. And I remember asking him, what kind of state have we now when you get past your constitution? And he said, well, if you refer to Chambers' English Dictionary and look up the word republic. Well, I said, you need say no more. We have a dictionary republic. Is that what you mean? And he was very angry.
Deb had a very strong feeling that once the oath was removed and other things done, that the IRA had no further reason for not joining him. It was a strange thing. Devil never realized that the IRA didn't regard him as a Republican.
He had some success.
I accepted, from 1907 on, I accepted the Constitution. I accepted the government established under the Constitution as being the lawful government of the country, and therefore did not approve of any attempts to overthrow that government.
And De Valera's partial success with some extreme Republicans was further confirmed when, in 1938, he negotiated the return from Britain of those Irish ports in which Britain had retained garrison rights under the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Malcolm MacDonald was then Dominion Secretary.
I thought that if we retained our right to use them, and did use them in a neutral Ireland in case of war, this would make Irish public opinion blow up against us, and they would join the war against us. And indeed, Germany could invade Ireland as an ally of Ireland and attack us. And so, thinking it all over, I thought that on balance, it would be prudent if we could get a proper agreement on everything else to give up our right to use the ports. And if I may say so, this view was shared by the 3 chiefs of staff of the Army, Navy and Air Force at the time, and therefore I made that recommendation to the Cabinet.
Spike Island and the adjoining Cork Harbour defences have been handed over to the custody of Éire. This is the first stage in pursuance of the defence provisions of the agreement between the British government and Mr. De Valera. Amid scenes of the utmost friendliness, the British troops departed on a tender for the motor vessel that was to take them to Fishguard. Mr. De Valera arrived at Spike in a launch and made an inspection of a guard of honour. And so the defence of Cork, after 150 years, passes into the keeping of its native land.
But 6 counties of Ireland were still British. In Britain, in 1939, the IRA started a bombing campaign against Irish partition. In Coventry, 5 people were killed, nearly 100 injured. By the end of 1939, Britain was at war with Germany. An hour of danger, which was, by Irish Republican tradition, once again Ireland's opportunity.
Signs of the times. A mass meeting on College Green, Dublin, is addressed by antagonists of yesterday.
De Valera took the opportunity to assert unequivocally Ireland's neutrality. He was joined in this by William Cosgrave, his old opponent. De Valera could now assert officially that sense of quite separate Irish nationality, which reservists were now called up to defend, and to which he'd been working his way towards for Ireland in the 18 years since the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Reservists were there to repel any aggressor.
No, we were in no position to enter into a war at all, and the only other option open to us was to win with the British Army. So that wouldn't be acceptable to the majority of the people, and Dev then decided on a neutrality, and that was backed up very firmly by the country.
There was certainly, I think, no desire for the Axis powers to win. But at the same time, there was always, among some of the personnel at any rate, a kind of feeling of gladness when the British in particular would meet with some reverse. I must say that.
In 1940, however, Malcolm MacDonald was again involved in negotiations with De Valera in the hope of getting Irish participation in the war.
The British government's final proposals were that they would come out with a statement in principle in favour of a united Ireland, and that added to that statement would be a declaration that a united Ireland would in fact be in existence quite soon in practice. De Valera and his colleagues rejected the proposals. They absolutely trusted the sincerity of British ministers in urging this and saying it could come into operation fairly soon. But they did not trust the Northern Ireland authorities, and they thought that even if the Northern Ireland ministers agreed to sit on the joint committee to work out a constitution for a united Ireland, they wouldn't agree on the constitution, and that the whole thing would break down. And therefore, they said, this is no guarantee that there will be a united Ireland, even later, let alone sooner.
So 26 counties of Ireland remained neutral, and British propaganda vilified this neutrality and Eira's regular army.
The German-style helmet saves them from the embarrassment of looking British. The gallant 7,000 have read that there's a war on. Eira, they declare, will be defended against whoever attacks her. No names, no parachutes. And other volunteers are doing home guard duty. Less to stop 2 million Nazis dropping from the sky than to raise Cain should a British destroyer stray within territorial limits.
In both Britain and Ireland, stories circulated that German U-boats were putting in to refuel at inlets on the west coast of Ireland.
Never did I hear of a case of a U-boat landing anywhere, or taking in arms, or being in any way associated with the country other than buying fish from fishermen. I do know some of the fishermen told me themselves, and when they were miles off Ironmore Head, that sometimes a U-boat would surface and somebody who spoke English would shout to them, "Have you any fish?" And they gave them the fish, and they were paid for it.
I know that Churchill had drawn up plans for an invasion of Southern Ireland, if necessary. Mind you, he had drawn up plans for all sorts of possibilities, and he was wise in case it became necessary.
There was one night in the very depths of winter, I remember, when the word came that they were going to invade from the north. I was in Athlone at the time, and we turned out our forces and marched to take up position on the border. And it was an awful night, I remember well, the rain was coming down in buckets. But after about, I think we were only absent from barracks for about 2 days when the order came to come back to barrack.
Meanwhile, what of the IRA? They were in secret touch with Germany, and at the beginning of the war, in 1939, they'd carried out a sensationally successful raid on the Irish government's principal arms depot at the Magazine Fort in Phoenix Park, Dublin. The IRA got away with 13 lorries and 1 million rounds of ammunition, the bulk of the Irish Army's reserve supplies. This was soon recovered, but it was the last straw for De Valera's government in their attitude to the IRA.
It was the thing that finally made them bestir themselves to deal with the IRA. Up to that, there had been a certain schizophrenic attitude on the part of the government towards the IRA. On the one hand, they were trying to maintain that they couldn't take the law into their own hands, and the other, they were trying to excuse them for things. And I think this came as a frightful shock to the government.
Soon internment and even execution of IRA men for attacks on the police in Dublin were to follow. A German spy, Hermann Goetz, who came to Ireland for direct contacts with the IRA, as Irish intelligence soon discovered.
When he came down in May 40, he came in one parachute. His radio and communication stuff was in a different parachute. He lost that parachute. The IRA failed to provide him with an effective transmitter for a very long period. They gave him one or two which were hopeless. And it was one of the things that illustrated to him then what he regarded as their complete incompetence.
More executions of IRA men by De Valera's government followed attacks on the police.
Some of those who were executed were people with whom we had been associated during the Civil War, whom we knew. It troubled us certainly very much so. But you see, in the end, it had to be faced up to.
Well, none of us like to see it happen again. I mean, we'd had so much of that in the past that it was obnoxious. But since they wouldn't negotiate, they wouldn't compromise, there was no alternative. Force had to be met by force.
George Plant was a Protestant, and there weren't many Protestants in the Republican movement. And he was very courageous. I remember he gave me a description the night before his execution. I went up to see him, and he gave me a description of what it felt like. He says, it's all right for you people, you were Catholic, you probably believe profoundly in your religion hereafter. I don't know, but I worked for a number of years. I used to work on steel scaffoldings on skyscrapers, building skyscrapers in Chicago. And I often wondered what happened if I fell on one side. Well, now tomorrow morning I'm going to fall off a scaffolding and I don't know what waits for me at the bottom.
So De Valera brought Ireland through the war, having, apparently, broken the IRA. He had successfully substantiated the Irish sense of independent nationalism by keeping her neutral. He stretched this neutrality to what some people considered unnecessary lengths when he paid a call on the German legation in Dublin to convey his condolences on the death of Hitler. Winston Churchill, in his Victory in Europe speech, drew attention to what Ireland's neutrality had meant for Britain.
this was indeed a deadly moment in our life. And if it had not been for the loyalty and friendship of Northern Ireland, we should have been forced to come to close quarters with Mr. de Valera or perish forever from the earth.
Churchill received a magisterial reply from de Valera.
I know the kind of answer I am expected to make. I know the answer that first springs to the lips of every man of Irish blood. I know the reply I would have given a quarter of a century ago. But I have deliberately decided that this is not the reply I shall make tonight. Mr. Churchill makes it clear that in certain circumstances he would have violated our neutrality and that he would justify his action by Britain's necessity. It seems strange to me that Mr. Churchill does not see that this, if accepted, would mean that Britain's necessity would become a moral code.
3 years later, by a turn of the wheel of democratic fortune, de Valera lost office.
Attended by a smart military escort and ADCs, Mr. O'Kelly, President of ERA, is seen arriving at the Pro Cathedral in Dublin for the service that traditionally precedes the election of a new Premier.
De Valera was now out of office for the first time in 16 years. A coalition of MacBride's new Republican Clan na Poblata party was formed with the old Free State party, now named Fine Gael, and led now by John A. Costello, who became Prime Minister. Soon after receiving the seal of office, Costello, on a visit to Canada, to the surprise of his colleagues, announced that ERA would be at last a republic.
I don't remember the question being debated formally in Cabinet at all. I don't remember receiving any papers about it. I don't believe that there were any papers about it. And the proposal that we repealed the External Relations Act was made by Mr. Costello in Canada and came as a complete surprise to the rest of us in the Cabinet. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And in fact, when he came back, poor man, I felt sorry for him because he saw that there was great disappointment, I think, in his own party. I don't think they were keen on it. We in Clan na Poblata, I was perfectly happy that it should happen. I had no objections to it happening at all, to its being repealed. But in his own party, I think they were rather more pro-British at the time than they are now.
ERA was now the republic it had been in all but name since the Constitution of 1937.
The hoisting was performed by the youngest officer in the Irish Army and was followed by a feu de joie.
And so, almost casually, it came about that 33 years after Patrick Pearse had stood in front of the Dublin Post Office here in 1916 and proclaimed an Irish Republic to bemused onlookers, a Republic of Ireland could at last be celebrated with full panoply of state. The ideals of Pearse, Connolly, the Fenians and Wolfe Tone finally achieved? Well, hardly. Though the new Republic's constitution did assert the unity of the whole of Ireland, the very proclamation of a republic helped widen the division between this part of Ireland and the northern Protestants. And the new Republic's first political crisis was to confirm the northern Protestants' worst fears about what a united Ireland might mean for them.
The new Republican cabinet proposed a bill for the adoption of children, for which there was no legal provision in Ireland. Noel Browne was in that cabinet.
General Sean McKeown, who was a Minister for Justice, came into the cabinet one morning and told us that he won't allow it, that's all, he said. He won't allow it. And I gathered that he'd been to the Archbishop of Dublin, Dr. McQuaid, and Dr. McQuaid had forbidden us to have the adoption bill. And that appeared to be the end of it. And the adoption bill was killed as a result of that. But I was a very young person at the time, easily the youngest member of the cabinet and all that kind of thing, very young in politics too. But I remember at the same time being rather shocked by that decision that these people, these were the senior people to me, accepting the diktat of somebody outside cabinet as to what we should do about this proposal. The phrase one constantly heard was, one can't afford to fight the church. One can't afford to fight the church, Catholic Church.
The church feared Catholic children might be adopted by Protestants. When later Noel Browne, with cabinet agreement, proposed to extend state health benefits to mothers and children, more objection came from the Archbishop of Dublin, who said health was the family's responsibility and not the state's, and he opposed the scheme.
A maternity scheme for mothers in respect of motherhood and children up to the age of 16 years, that would be free, no means test. A little bit like the Bevan scheme, not so extensive. The Archbishop of Dublin sent me a letter, sent a letter to the cabinet, the head of the Taoiseach, the head of the cabinet, and sent it to me as well, saying that he would not allow me to have the scheme. And I went to the cabinet. I must say I ignored that letter, and I went on the radio and I said, still the scheme is coming on. But after doing that, I went to the cabinet and Mr. Costello, the Taoiseach, told me that the scheme was not going to be permitted the government to change their minds. And I asked each one of them, I said, each one of you have to make your mind up about it, whether you to tell me that you've decided to repudiate your earlier decision. And I went around and each one of them said that they would not consider for a moment going against the wishes of the Catholic Church.
Was this Irish Republic the sort of state with which Northern Protestants